class. I hope you are having a good day today. I am here with you to talk again about the writer John Cheever. I say again because I hope you remember earlier in the semester, we spoke about his story, The 548. And today we're going to be talking about his story from 1947. It's called The Enormous Radio. Okay. So I am going to be spoiling things from the plot. So if you haven't finished reading it, please go back and read the story. Okay, so I'm not going to go through my whole presentation on the writer, John Cheever, right? I hope you remember, right? We spoke about him before, right? So I'll just bring up a few things that are significant to this story, right? The news story for today. So you hopefully remember that I said John Cheever, one of the themes that comes up in a number of his works is this idea of the distinction, the disjunction, right, between our outward appearance, the way we portray ourselves and our lives, and the reality. Okay, so in Cheever's own life, he was, by all outward appearances, a happily married man who married his wife when he was 28, and he was with her until he was 70 years old. They had children, they had a beautiful home, they seemed very happy. But the reality was far from ideal because John Cheever had a secret, and that was that he was bisexual and that he had relationships with both men and women during the course of his marriage. Okay, so that's just one thing to think about, right? Because the story that we're going to be talking about today, The Enormous Radio, certainly the idea of secrecy, right? Secrets that we have, right? Deception, right? The outward appearance that we show to the world versus the reality of what's going on behind closed doors, right? That comes up in the story, right? It's like kind of the main theme of the story, right? And we also see in this story what a lot of critics call a classic Cheever breakdown, which is where in one of his stories, a character is confronted with something that is very painful. Okay, and we see that in this story, right, with both the characters, Jim and Irene. Okay, now, one of the reasons I chose this story, The Enormous Radio, is because I am shocked at how John Cheever seemed to foreshadow, right, or predict our current day interest in social media. Okay, so he wrote this in 1947, right? There was no social media. He had no idea that, what that even means. But yet we see in this story, right, the radio enables Jim and Irene to listen to private conversations that are going on in the building, right, in the high-rise apartment building that they live in. So when they turn on the radio, right, they somehow, right, can eavesdrop on, like I said, private conversations. And so, right, kind of in the same way that when we, look at social media, Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, Twitter, whatever you use, we can learn things about other people's lives, right? These can be people that we know, or they can be strangers, right? Or, celebrities. And we become, sometimes obsessed with following what other people are doing, okay? And then we sometimes, right, compare ourselves to other people in the same way that Jim and Irene, because of the radio, right, they are able to, right, learn these things about other people's lives, and then sometimes, right, maybe compare themselves to these other people. Okay, so I feel like, wow, John Cheever, how incredible, right, that he wrote this story. I feel like it's very relevant today, and that's one of the reasons I chose it. Okay, so let's go ahead and start by saying something about the setting. Okay, so the setting, right, we learn is 1940s, and we are in New York. Okay, and most of the action takes place within Jim and Irene Westcott's apartment, which we learn is in a beautiful high-rise apartment building. They're on the 12th floor. Okay, now what is significant about this setting? Okay, well, the time period, 1940s, we should be thinking about the different gender roles within a marriage. Okay, so we see in the story, Jim is the provider, right? He goes to work every day while his wife stays home. Okay, so we'll get into that a little bit more, right? Also relevant during this time period, right? There really is no technology. There's no television that they have. There's no computers. They have a radio. And so the radio is their primary form of entertainment. When Jim gets home from work, right, they turn on the radio. That is their pastime. Okay, the point of view, is it first person, second person, or third person? Okay, we see that there is no narrator, I, telling the story. Instead, this story is third person limited. So we have an outside narrator who refers to all the characters by their name, right? Or by using the pronoun he, she, or they. Okay, so it is third person limited. We get a little bit of insight into one of the characters and what they're thinking, and that happens to be Irene. Okay, so let's start by talking about Irene. Right? What kind of a woman is Irene Westcott? Right, and how does the radio affect her daily life and her emotional state? Okay, so she's a 1940s housewife. She doesn't work outside of the home. And, we learn that, I would say she has a pretty nice life in a lot of ways, and that she has a maid, she has a handyman, and she has a nanny. Okay, so she doesn't have to worry about, cooking and cleaning, and a lot of the care for her children is done by the nanny. So she has a lot of time to do things like go to lunch, go shopping, spend time with her friends. But right, we also learned that, she's completely dependent on her husband because she does not have an income, right? She doesn't have a job or a career, and that she is given an allowance by her husband. Okay, so what do we learn about the radio and how it changes Irene? Well, initially when the radio comes into the home, and I think this is a question on the quiz, right? So pay attention. She views the radio as being very ugly. It doesn't match her decor. It's, she doesn't like the way it looks in her home. So initially, right, she views it as, I think she uses the word, a malevolent intruder. Okay, so some foreshadowing, we can say. But right then, she kind of makes amends. It has a beautiful tone, right? And then she starts to learn that this radio has a very strange quality, as I said, and that it enables her to listen to other people's conversations. Okay, so no longer is she interested in listening to classical music. That was her pastime. Now, right, she's just every day enthralled by listening to, right, her neighbor's business, their personal business. So as soon as her husband goes to work, first thing she runs to the radio, right? Even when she wakes up in the night to get her son a glass of water, oh, go over to the radio. I might be missing out on something, heaven forbid, right? So, and then, right, we see that it changes her, right? She starts to cancel plans that she had, to do things with her friends, right? And even Jim, her husband, notices that she's acting strangely, okay, so her whole life seems to revolve now around the radio. Okay, so it changes her emotionally. She seems, quote, sad and vague, right? And she starts to now judge her neighbors, right? She's thinking, who's the person who's having the affair, right? Who's the person that I heard talking about money troubles, right? She overhears people, that are planning a party say things like, oh, get rid of the liver paste first. Save the good scotch for people with gray hair, right? Somebody found a diamond after a party and they're just, instead of returning it to the person they know whose ring it fell out of, right? They're talking about selling it. And then even more upsetting to her, she starts to realize that there's some domestic abuse going on in the building, right? That Mr. Osborne is beating his wife. Okay, so she's like learning all these horrible things that are going on, and it's starting to make her feel emotionally unstable. Okay, and she, that now we see, starts to question her own happiness, right? And she starts to doubt herself, right? She says to her husband, and I'm just going to use my paper copy here, right? She says, when she's talking to her husband, I can find it quickly, right? We've never been like that, have we? Right? We've always been good and decent and loving to one another, haven't we? And we have two beautiful children. Our lives aren't sordid, are they, darling? Are they? We're happy, aren't we, darling? We are happy, aren't we? Okay, so she's starting to like question her own happiness. And interestingly, right, her husband, and we haven't said anything about him yet, his response, right, is, of course we're happy. Of course we're happy. So like, oh, are they? Okay, we'll go back to that, right? Okay. So let's say something about Jim, the husband. What kind of a man is he? Right? Why did he purchase this radio, which he tells us cost $400? Okay, and this is in the 1940s. Okay, so I did a little bit of research. $400 in 1947 is approximately $5,000 today. Okay, so this is a very expensive purchase, right? $400 for a radio. Okay, so why did he buy the radio? Well, we see his role in the family, as I mentioned, is the provider. He's the work person who has the money that he can use to surprise his wife, right? To impress his wife with an expensive gift. But then, as we see, he does have a habit of sort of playing the martyr role, in the sense that, he gives, surprises her with this very expensive, extravagant gift. But then later in the story, right, he reminds her of how much it cost. And, he says things like, I hope you enjoy this radio. I bought it for you. I hope you get some enjoyment out of it. It cost a lot of money. So kind of this, this fake selflessness. I bought it for you. But, as we see, he also enjoys the radio. Right? And, like the kind of person who buys a gift and then has to bring up how much it cost and the sacrifice that he's making for her to have the gift. It gives us some insight about him, right? And so, right, we also come to see that he also has a secret, right? And what is his secret? Well, his secret is that things aren't going as well at his job, at his workplace, as his wife might think that they are, as he might have led her to believe, right? That he is actually concerned about his job, right? Because, it's some kind of a sales job, right? He's not making as much commission, right? So he's worried and he's concerned, like they're going to have to cut back. Right. And kind of jumping ahead a little bit here, but later in the story, right, again, because Irene again is like, oh, we're happy. We're not hypercritical or worried about money or dishonesty, are we? Okay. Initially he's like, oh, no, not us. Right. Everything's great. We're happy. Okay. But then, right, later in the story, we see the climax of the story when he kind of implodes, right? He loses it. He will not perjure himself and lie and say, oh yes, we're happy, everything's perfect, right? He finally loses it, right? And that's when he's saying, we've got to start cutting down. I've worked awfully hard to give you and the children a comfortable life. Okay, I don't want to hear all my energies, all my youth wasted, and fur coats and radios and slip covers. And then in that moment, we see Irene, she's starting to be paranoid, thinking that maybe other people in the building can hear them and can hear this secret, right? That they're really not doing as well financially as people might think. And that's the moment when we see Jim lose it, right? This, like, he has a meltdown. Oh, I'm sick. The radio can't hear us. Okay, and then he says, why are you so Christly all of a sudden? I love that line. What's turned you overnight into a convent girl? And then, right, we see he unleashes all of their secrets. Okay, and more specifically, he really cuts into his wife, right? He confronts her, right? Why did you lie to me? Right? Because she's lied about bills that she, right, says that she's paid that she hasn't, that are piling up. Right. And then he lashes out with all of Irene's ugly secrets. Right. And so he says, right, you stole your mother's jewelry before they probated her will. You never gave your sister a cent of that money that was intended for her. You made Grace Howland's life miserable. And where was all your piety and your virtue when you went to that abortionist? I'll never forget how cool you were. You packed your bag and went off to have that child murdered as if you were going to Nassau. If you had any good reasons, if you had any good reasons. Okay, so this is a very painful moment in the story for Irene, okay, right? Because we learn that, right, that they, Irene and Jim, they have just as many secrets as the neighbors do, right? Maybe more. Right? Him confronting her. And, I would just like to add here my thought that, there's nothing wrong with Irene getting an abortion. I'm not trying to suggest that, right, in reading that passage, right? That is her choice. But I think what's wrong here is it suggested that she did it without talking to her husband first. Right? That's what he says, that she did it secretly, and that he feels betrayed by that. Okay, but the point here is that we see that these two characters who are, right, portraying themselves to their friends, their acquaintances, as having this like perfect life, that they don't, that they have just as many secrets as the neighbors do. Okay, and I love the way the story ends, right? Because the very end of the story, after this like meltdown that we've just witnessed between the husband and wife, right? This climax, this, right? Then like Irene is standing in front of the radio, and when she turns it on, it says, the voice on the radio was suave and non-committal. An early morning railroad disaster in Tokyo killed 29 people. A fire in a Catholic hospital near Buffalo for the care of blind children was extinguished early this morning by nuns. The temperature is 47, the humidity is 89. So we're back to our, New York lives, the weather, the humidity, right, the temperature, and then the news, right? The kind of news that we are used to hearing every day on the radio. This tragic event, that tragic event, right? And so the news that she hears, 29 people dead in a railroad disaster and a fire in a hospital for blind children, right? This is much worse than anything that Irene has heard that's going on in her building, right? So it really just underscores the ugliness, the tragedy of the world, right, that is ever present. Okay. Now, of course, in this story, we can say there's a lot of symbolism, right? I think the most important symbol, of course, being the radio, okay, right? A symbol for the ugliness of the truth, right? The ugly secrets about people's lives that the radio reveals. And then, I feel like just the way we see the evolution of Irene's response to the radio and to what it discloses, right? Initially, it's like delight, and then horror, and then dread, and then resentment. And I can even say, like, if we think about our own relationship with social media, initially, I think I remember back in the day, right, when I first got Facebook and Instagram, kind of feeling delight. Wow, this is so cool. I can like see what like some person I went to high school with, I haven't seen in 20 years. I can like see what's going on in their lives. Right? How cool is that? It's like awesome. But then you start to realize, the horror, right? Do I really want to know all these things? And then the dread, right? And then even, I will say the resentment, like, oh my God, I have to continue to see these things that all these people that I don't really care that much about, I have to follow this. And then the way we end up comparing ourselves to other people and the way it makes us feel depressed, right? Bad, maybe, about our own lives. Okay, just in the same way that the radio makes Irene and Jim feel right about their own lives. So, I feel like just such a wonderful story. And just to like wrap up, the themes of the story will certainly, right, privacy, secrets, deceptions, right? That too much voyeurism does affect our mental health, right? And also our relationships with other people, right? We see that in this story. Okay. All right, well, I'm gonna wrap up today, make it a little shorter, my video. I hope you enjoy the John Cheever story, and I look forward to reading your thoughts on the discussion board. So have a great rest of your day.